Hey guys, welcome to another crash course by Traversy Media. This is going to be a video and tutorial on TypeScript. Alright, so what is TypeScript? It was created by Microsoft and it's a superset of JavaScript. So if you don't know what a superset is, it's basically anything you can do in JavaScript, you can also do in TypeScript. So it inherits all the functionality of JavaScript and then adds some extra features and syntax, which we'll go over in a minute. Another example of superset is Objective-C, which is a superset of the C language. So TypeScript compiles or transcompiles into standard JavaScript. Because a browser can't read a TypeScript file, it can only read JavaScript. There's a program called TSC that we can use to compile it easily. TypeScript can be integrated into JavaScript projects quite easily, and it was designed for larger applications. Now, of course, you could use it with small apps, but if you have a very small code base, it might just be a wasted extra step to add TypeScript. All right, so we know what TypeScript is, but what does it do? What does it offer us? So first of all, it gives us static type checking. By default, JavaScript is an untyped language, meaning that we don't have to specify variable or type or function types. And what I mean by types is a string or number, array, and so on. High-level languages like Java, they require you to specify your types. And although it's an extra step, it does have a lot of advantages. All right, and the great thing about TypeScript is that static typing is completely optional, so you don't have to do it. All right, we also get class-based objects with TypeScript. If you have any experience with PHP or Python or Java, you've probably worked with classes in object-oriented programming. With standard JavaScript ES5, you had to use prototypes, which is kind of confusing and annoying. With the new ES6 standard, we can use classes, and TypeScript is fully compatible with ES6 as well. Now, TypeScript also makes JavaScript more modular, so we can do things like import other files and other modules and components. Also, we get all the ES6 features like arrow functions, and we can use let and const for declaring variables, things like that. All right, so overall it gives us a syntax that's closer to higher level languages like Java and Scala. Alright, so static type checking, one of the main features, hence the word TypeScript. We can check and assign types for variables, parameters, and functions. So like I said, this is completely optional. It's not going to throw an error if you don't use it. The only time it's going to throw an error is if you do assign a certain type to a variable and then you try to fill it with the wrong type. So if you typecast it as a string and then you put a number in it. Static types also they'll find and prevent bugs and stop future issues from happening. Not only that, but it makes our code much more readable and descriptive, especially if we're sharing that code with others. So here are the types we can use in TypeScript. So we have basic types such as strings, numbers, booleans, which are true, false values, and arrays. And then we also have the any type, which is just that. It can be anything, and any kind of type. Void, which is no type returned. We have null or undefined. A tuple, which is an array with a fixed number of elements. Enum, which are enumerated values. And then generics, which specify the type of constraint. Okay, this is great for reusable code. It's a little more advanced, and we might get into it later. I'm not exactly sure. All right. So another huge advantage to TypeScript is the use of classes. So this gives us the ability to use true object-oriented programming in our JavaScript applications. We can define classes, properties, methods. We can stop using prototype-based objects. It provides us with encapsulation and keeps all the functionality of certain resources in one place. So if we have a blog on our website, we can have a blog or a post class, and we can keep all that functionality inside of that class and then use it when needed. Let's see, so inheritance, we can inherit classes and have subclasses, and we can even use access modifiers like public, protected, and private And this using classes is alone is a great reason to use TypeScript. Alright, so as I mentioned, TypeScript files need to be compiled because the browser doesn't read TypeScript. This is done with the TypeScript Compiler, which is called TSC. So basically it takes the .ts files and transpiles them into .js files. And then we can just include those files in our HTML. Alright, so TSC can be installed with npm, which is the Node package modules. So you'll just need to install Node.js on your system. You can follow along with this tutorial even if you don't know anything about Node. So don't worry about that. And if you do want to learn more about Node.js, I have plenty of videos on my channel on it. It also supports ES6 or the ES 2015 syntax, so we can use let and const, arrow functions, and all that good stuff. Alright, so that's it for the slide introduction. Let's go ahead and jump in and get started with TypeScript. Alright guys, we're going to go ahead and get started with TypeScript. Now before we do anything, you need to have Node.js installed, so if you don't, just go to nodejs.org, go ahead and download and install it, or if you're on Linux or a Mac, you can install it using your package managers. Just make sure you get that set up. Alright, now as far as code for a text editor, I'm using Visual Studio Code, which is really nice for TypeScript. It has really good highlighting and error checking, so I would recommend it. But of course you can use whatever you'd like for your text editor. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Now first thing I want to do is I'm going to open up a command line or your Mac or Linux terminal. And we need to install TypeScript with npm. Okay, so I'm going to say npm, where it doesn't matter what path you're in because we're installing it globally. Just make sure you do npm install -g. That'll install it globally so that you can access it from anywhere. And then you just want to say TypeScript. Okay, I already have it installed, so that's why it went so quick. Now, what I'm going to do is go into a folder where I want to create my files. I'm going to go into projects, and I'm going to create a directory. I'm going to call it TS Sandbox. Okay, and then we'll go into that. Okay, so we have TypeScript installed, and what we want to do is I'm going to open up the folder in my editor. And I'm going to create a file called types.ts. Okay, TS, not JS. Let's see, I'm just going to close that. And from here, what we're going to do is, let's just say console log hello from TS. And we'll save that. And then what we want to do is compile this TypeScript file into JavaScript. So we can say over here tsc and then the name of the file, which is types.ts. Okay, and now if you look over here, you can see it created a JS file which has the same exact thing in it. It's the same thing because we didn't put any TypeScript in the TS file, so it's identical. But the JS is what you're going to want to include in your application or your website. So if we have an index.html file here, I'll just paste this in, so just simple HTML, and you would want to say script source, and you want the types.js file. Okay, so if we were to save that and then open it up, okay, we get our hello world. Alright, and if we open up the console, we get hello from TS. So all of our work is going to be in the TS file. We don't want to touch the JS. That's just what gets compiled and what's included in our HTML. Alright, so let's go ahead and write some TypeScript. So let's create a variable, and we're going to use let. So let's say let my string, and we're going to give that a type of string. Okay, and then down here, let's say my string equals hello world, and then we'll simply console log my string. Alright, so if we save that, and we need to compile it, so let's go TSC types TS, enter, and now if we look at types.js, you'll see this, and it doesn't have that TypeScript in it, okay, this right here, which is TypeScript. It compiles it down to standard JavaScript. Alright, now it can be a pain in the ass to have to do this every time you update. So what we can do is we can run the compiler in watch mode. So if we do tsc types.ts -w, that'll run it in watch mode. So every time we save, this will update and compile it. All right, now let's see what happens if we change my string to, let's say, a 1. Okay, now notice right away, VS Code gives us this error, says type 1 is not assignable to type string. So this editor is really nice for TypeScript, and I know that there's plugins you can add to Sublime Text and add them to do this kind of thing, but I think that this is pretty cool that it does it right off the bat. But let's save that, and then down here notice that it says the same thing. We get that error in our console, and if we reload, it's going to give us that 1. It's not going to give us any browser errors because we don't want that anyways. This is for the developer, not for the user. But that's going to throw an error. So if we do let's say let my num, and we'll set that to number. We'll say my num equals 22. Let's make this back to a string. Okay, then we'll console log my num, save it. We get 22, and let's look in the console, and we get no errors. I'm just going to move this up. Okay, but if we were to change my num to a string, see, we already get the error there, and we get it down here. Okay, next type we'll look at is Boolean. So we'll say let my bool, set that to Boolean. Set it to true. Save that. True. We have no errors. If we set this to false, again, no errors. If we set it to 1, we get an error because 1 is not assignable to a Boolean. All right. So with these, let's say with numbers, there's quite a few things that we can use as a number. So that an integer, obviously, positive or negative. If we save that, that's fine. If we do an expression, so if we can say 5 plus 5, save that, that's okay. We can do a decimal. If we say 5.5, that's fine. What else? We can do a hexadecimal. So if we do 0x f 00d, that's fine. All right, and then for a string, we can do concatenated strings. So if we were to concatenate in here, a space, we can do that. And let's console log that. Okay, so that gives us hello world. We could even do a function return as a string. So for instance, if we take this hello and we'll say hello dot slice, and let's say 0.3. Save that. You can see that works. That gives us HEL because what it's doing is it's just taking the first 3 characters of the string. Okay, but that works. That's fine for a string. Next one we have is any. So if we say let I'm just going to call it my var, and we'll set it to any, and then we'll say my var equals 5. Console log that. Okay, we get 5. No errors. We can say hello. That's fine. We can say true. That's fine. So it can be absolutely anything. Alright, so those are the simple data types: string, number, boolean, any. Let's take a look at arrays. Alright, now there's actually two ways to define an array type. So let's start with this one. We'll say let str array, and we're going to set that to string, but we're going to put these brackets on the end of it. Okay, so whoops, did I not spell that right? string. What the heck? What is this error? Cannot find the name string. Oh, I put an equal sign. Okay, so what this is saying is that this has to be an array of strings. So let's go down here and say str array equals hello world, and we'll console log that. Okay, we get hello world, no errors, everything's fine. If I were to add in a 1 here, you'll see that we get an error. We get it down here as well. Okay, we can also do let num array, and we'll set that to number array. Okay, we'll set that to, let's say, 1, 2, 3. Num array. Okay, everything's fine. If I put a string in here, we get an error. Okay, it still works up here, but we're still getting an error. Okay, we can also do an array of booleans. So let's say let bool array. Oh, I keep putting that equal sign there. And we can do true, whoops, true, false, true. Okay, and that's fine. Now, the other way that we can define these, let me just comment these out. The other way that we can define arrays is we can say let string array, and we can do array, and then put in our angle brackets, and say we want this array to be a string or strings. Okay, notice that we're not getting an error here. We can do the same thing for the other ones. So this will be num array. So number. And we can do bool array. Set that to boolean. Okay, no errors there. Everything's good. So let's now look at a tuple, which is basically an array with a defined number of elements. So let's say let, we'll say string num tuple, and we're going to set that with some brackets, and then we'll say string number. So basically what this has to match is an array with a string and then a number. So down here, let's say string num tuple. Let's set that to, let's see, we'll say hello and 4. Okay, notice that error went away. Save it. Everything's good. If we were to change this to a 3, we still get an error, and if we change this to a string, we get an error because it has to match this exactly. Okay, now what happens if we do match it like that, and then we add on to it? Notice that we're now not getting any errors. This is fine. The reason for that is once you pass that initial string number pattern, you can put whatever you want. It's then a union, okay, which is a little weird, but that's how it works. Okay, so that's a tuple. Let's see. Let's look at void, undefined, and null. Okay, so if we say my void, or no, let my void, and we'll set that to void, and let's set that, we can set it here as well. Whoops. And then let's log my void. Whoops, I need to change the batteries in this keyboard. Alright, so log that and we get null. So void can be null. Let's see, let's try undefined. Does that work? Yeah, it looks like that works too. But if we set it to, let's say, 1, we get an error. Okay, there's also null and undefined types. So let's say my null and my undefined. Okay, so it looks like undefined is okay for all of these. Let's see. Oh wait, we didn't change this. Null, undefined. Okay, so it is okay. If we change this to null, that's good. Let's try changing this one to null, and that works as well. Okay, so that's going to be it for types or variable types. I now want to look at functions. So I'm actually going to create a new file for this. So let's create a file called, not types, functions.ts. Okay, and we'll close up types. And I'm going to stop the compiler because we want to change it now to ts functions.tsw. Alright, and let's include that in our HTML. There's not a lot of purpose to having this browser open and including it in the HTML, but what the hell. Alright, so functions. So let's create a function here, something very simple. We'll say get sum. Okay, so this is a function that's going to take two numbers and add them. So it'll take num1, num2, and then we just want to return num1 plus num2. Okay, so let's use that. We'll console log get sum, and let's say 1 and 4. Okay, save that. Gives us 5 up here. We have no errors, obviously, because there's no TypeScript yet. So with functions, we can add a type to the parameters as well as the function's return type. So let's say for the parameter, num1 has to be a number, num2 has to be a number. Okay, and then the function itself, the return value, also has to be a number. Okay, so if we save that, everything's fine. But let's go ahead and let's try and return a string. So we'll get rid of that, and we'll return hello. And you can see the error, hello is not assignable to type number. If we save it, we get that error down here as well. Okay, so if we try to go right here and enter a string, we get an error. Okay, assignment argument of type hello is not assignable to parameter of type number. Save it, gives us the same error down here. Okay, so you can see that this is making our code much more strict and just much cleaner in general. Now let's comment this out, and let's create a variable called mySum, and I'm just going to set this variable to a function. Okay, so function, same thing, it's going to take in num1, num2, and let's, same thing, return num1, num2, and then we could simply console.log my sum, and we'll pass in 3 and 5. Okay, we reload, we get 8. So let's add to this number. I could have just copied and pasted what I had up there, but whatever. Alright, actually no, you know what I want to do is I want to say any. Because what I want to happen is I want to be able to put in this, a number, or the number as a string type with quotes around it. So I want it to accept any, but I want it to return a number like this. Okay, so what we can do here is we can test to see what type of values these are. So let's do an if statement, and we'll say if type of num1 is equal to a string, then what do we want to do? We want to parse it as a number or as an integer. So we'll say num1 is then equal to parse int, which is a function that's going to parse a string as a number, and we'll say num1. Okay, and then we'll do the same thing for num2. Let's copy that. We'll say if num2 is a string, then we want to set num2 to parse int num2. And then we can return that. So now if we save that, everything's okay. And even if I go and I change this 3 to a string of 3, you'll see there's no error here and everything's fine. Okay, so this now accepts strings and numbers, but still returns a number. Alright, so let's create another function here. I'm going to just comment out the log. And let's create a function called getName. So this is going to take in a first name and a last name. And we're going to set these to the string type. And we want this function to also return a string. Alright, and notice that there's an error because it's not returning anything, which obviously isn't a string. So let's say return first name, and then what we'll do is just concatenate a space and then last name. And then let's call it down here. We'll say console.log getName, and we'll say John Doe. Save that. We get John Doe, we get no errors, everything's okay. Now, if you want, you can make these optional. So for this last name, if we put a question mark right here, that makes this optional. So if we get rid of this, now we're going to get an error. Well, not an error, but we're going to get John undefined. So what we can do is we can check for to see if last name is undefined. So we'll say if last name is equal to undefined, then let's just return first name. Okay, so then we just get John. Alright, let's see, what else did I want to do? We can also make a function return void, which is basically not returning anything at all. So let's say function my void, and let's say : void, and that's okay because it's not returning anything, no errors. If we say return 3, we're going to get an error saying 3 is not assignable to the type of void. Alright, but if we just do return, that's okay as well. Alright, so those are functions. So you can add types to your parameters as well as your return value. Okay, so let's save that and close that up. Okay, I'm going to create another file here, and we're going to look at interfaces. Okay, whoops, I said JS. That should be TS. TS. And we're going to stop this, and we just want to run this on interfaces.ts. Hello? Is that running? Okay, it must be running. Alright, and then in the index, we'll change functions to interfaces. Alright, so what we're going to do here is create a basic function. We're going to call this show to do, and we're going to pass in here to do and say that this has to have a title that's a string, and then it has to have text, which is a string. Okay, then we'll just console.log, and let's log to do.title, and we will concatenate that and say to do.text. Oops. Okay, and then let's say show to do, and what we'll do is we'll create a variable here called myToDo and set that to an object. Say title trash and text take out trash. Okay, and then we'll pass that in here like that. Let's save it. Let's reload, and we get trash take out trash. So what we can do to clean this up is create an interface. All right, now I'm going to copy this. The reason I don't delete this stuff is I want you guys to be able to have it for reference. So I know that I repeat myself sometimes here. But what we're going to do is create an interface, and we're going to call it to do. And we're going to say that this has to have a title that's a string, a text that's a string. And then down here, let's paste in that show to do. And instead of doing this messy crap, we can say to do, set that to the interface of to do. Okay, and then we'll just grab that. Whoops. We'll grab that. And this. Save it. Reload, and there we go. Okay, no errors. If we were to change this title to, let's say, a 1, a number, we get an error. You can see here it says, let's see, types property title are not incompatible, or are incompatible. Type number is not assignable to the string. What else does it say? Is not assignable to parameter type of to do. Okay, so this is how you can create an interface. So this looks a lot better than this crap up here. Okay, it's basically creating your own type. Okay, so instead of saying, you know, to do being a string or an array or whatever, you're saying that you want it to be a custom type of to do. Let's change that back. Okay, so that's an interface. Now the last thing I want to look at is classes. Okay, so let's go over here and create a new file called classes.ts. Close that up, and then we'll change this to classes. Stop this, and we'll say TSC classes. Alright, so if you know Java, PHP, Python, any object-oriented programming language, and you've worked with classes, this should be pretty easy to you. Basically the same syntax. Okay, so we're going to say class, we'll create a class called user. So a class can have properties and it can have methods. Okay, a property is basically just a value, a key value pair, and then you have methods, which are just functions inside the class. So let's give this class a property of name, and we're going to say this name has to be a string, email, which has to be a string, and then age, which has to be a number. Okay, those are the properties of our user. Now, inside of a class, you have something called a constructor. Okay, this is a special kind of function or method that runs when you instantiate an object with this class. So when you create a user, this is going to run. And what we want to be able to do is create a user and pass in this stuff here and have it added to these properties. So the constructor will take in a name, which will be a string, email, which will be a string, age, which will be a number. And then what we want to do is assign these to these properties. So we do that with this.name. When we use this, it pertains to this class. So we want this class name property, and we want to set it to the name being passed in. Same thing with the email. Same thing with the age. All right. And then let's just do a message here. We'll just say console.log, oops, and we'll say user created, and then we can just concatenate this.name. So that's a class, and what we want to do is create a user object. So to do that, we can create a variable. Let's say we'll call it John. So let John equals new user. All right, and then we're going to pass in those three things: his name, his email, and his age. Okay, notice the error thing went right away. So that's going to create a new user. Let's go ahead and save that, and if we reload here, you'll see user created John Doe. All right, so we have a class with our static typing. Something you definitely can't do with regular JavaScript. Now with ES6, with the newer standard, you can do classes, but you can't do the static typing, as far as I know. Now if we wanted to get, let's say, John's age, we could say console.log john.age. So if we save that, reload, you'll see we get 34. Now we can make it so that these can't be accessed from outside of the class by adding an access modifier. So if we say private, we'll say private to all of them, and we save that. If you look down here, property age is private and only accessible within class user. So we can't do this, and you'll see we get the error here as well. Now if we say for age public, then it works. Okay, we also have protected, which means that we can't access it from outside the class, but we can access it from any class that inherits this one. Okay, because you can use class inheritance. So let's take a look at inheritance. I'm going to remove these. And what we're going to do, let's comment that out for now. We're going to create, oh, actually, you know what, before we do that, let's look at methods. Okay, I want to create a method in this user class called register. Okay, and all this is going to do is just console log, and it's just going to say, we'll say this dot name, and then we'll concatenate is now registered. So to call that, let's make this live again, and then we can say John.register. Save it. And now you can see John Doe is now registered. We can also make these private. Save that. You can see we get the error saying register is private and only accessible within the class. So we could only call register from within this class. Alright, so now let's do a little inheritance. So down here, I'm going to create another class called member, and then we're going to say extends user. Okay, so this is it's inheriting the user class, and I'm going to give this a property of ID, which will be a number. Okay, so a member ID, and let's create a constructor. Now we want to pass in here the ID, which will be a number, along with the fields of the class it's inheriting. So let's grab these and place those in. Let's see, constructors must contain a super call. Okay, so the constructor of this class has to have a super function, and that's going to take in the properties of the class it's inheriting, which is name, email, and age. Okay, so now those errors go away. And then what we'll do is set this dot ID to ID. We don't have to do this dot name equals name and all that stuff, because we did that up here and then we use the super. So this is essentially doing this for us. All right, now if we want to, let's say, have a pay invoice function down here, what we could do is we can say super dot pay invoice, and then we can put that up here in the class it inherits. Okay, notice that now that error is gone. And up here we'll just console log, and let's say this dot name wait, that shouldn't be in quotes. So this dot name, and then we'll concatenate paid invoice. Alright, so now down here let's create a member. So we're going to say let Mike, and we're going to give him a type of user, and we'll say new member, and then we want to pass in the ID, which will say 1, his name, which will say Mike Smith, email, and age. Alright, so let's save that. And now we get user created Mike Smith, because he is a user, but he is also a member. So we can call pay invoice. We'll say Mike dot pay invoice. Save that. And now we get Mike Smith paid invoice. Alright, so I know this might be a little confusing, but I just wanted to make sure I go over all of it. The last thing I want to do is create an interface for our class. All right, so let's say interface, we'll call it user interface, and we know that it needs a name, which is a string, email, which is a string, age, number. We also need to include our functions, so we have a register function, and we have a pay invoice function. Okay, so now we can say class user implements user interface. Okay, and let's save that, and everything works out okay. Alright, so that's going to do it. Now there are some things that I didn't cover, but we covered all the types, functions, using types and parameters and return values, interfaces, classes, inheritance. If you want to keep going and you want to learn more and you want it to go a little slower, I do have an Eduonix course on TypeScript, which I'll put a link in the description. Alright, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please subscribe, leave a like, whatever you can do is fine, and I will see you next time.